Throughout my life, I have certainly experienced my fair share of complete and utter unmitigated disasters. There was 9/11, there was Fukushima, there was that time my mom told me she was going to be right back. There's John Jones' entire heavyweight title reign. The first time I ever placed a bet on a UFC fight. Betting $3,000 on Reiner De Ridder to win by decision. When my ex-girlfriend left me because I bet the entire second mortgage I took out on the house on a ping pong match just because I thought the Chinese guy was going to win. That one time I tripped and fell really bad. Every time I look in the mirror and realize I don't have my 2 front teeth. And then there's yesterday. And then there's last night. And then there was the fight between Bo Nickal and Reiner De Ridder. In terms of how that fight was for Bo Nickal, it just plain and simply was a complete and utter unmitigated disaster. I mean, Bo Nickal, part of me feels really bad for him, but at the same time, I tried to warn the guy. 4 days ago, I left a comment on his most recent YouTube video. It immediately rose to the top as the #1 most liked comment. And I just tried to tell the guy the problem that we're all seeing that this guy just clearly isn't seeing. And that's the fact that he's not girthy enough for 185 pounds. All right, I really think that is more or less what this all comes down to. He's a very, very good wrestler. Now, wrestling in itself is a very linear aspect of modern day MMA, but I think the real issue for the guy was he's not a girth monster like you're going to need to be in this weight class. Like I referenced in the comment, right, when the Craig Jones Invitational first came about, right, there was 2 weight classes. There was under 176 and there was over 176. Well, Bo threw his hat in the ring and said, look, I can make 176 and I might be down to compete in this tournament. And the only thing I was thinking in that moment was, what? You can make 176 and you're fighting at 185? What? How? What? That doesn't make it. That doesn't make any sense. How? What the fuck? What like legitimate contender at 185 could also make 176? I mean, again, look at the champion of the division. Look how fucking juicy this guy is. He's fucking yacked out of his mind. And you want to fight him giving up 20 fucking pounds to the guy? That's absolutely insane. All right, now look. Maybe if traditional wrestling was a better skill set to come from, it wouldn't be such a problem. But that does kind of lead us into the next massive issue that is just there with Bo Nickal. And it's the fact that times have changed, times have moved on, and being a high-level pure wrestler doesn't mean dick anymore. And the reason for that is when you just look at traditional wrestling rule sets, essentially the skills that it gives you is takedowns, takedown defense, scrambles, and pins out in the open. That is a pretty linear skill set based on today's MMA. That's not a lot anymore. I mean, again, right, go back 20 years ago, and there was a time where strikers just didn't know how to wrestle, right? The second you grabbed them, you were gonna ragdoll them, and they were completely helpless to stop you. But that's not the day we live in anymore. I mean, we live in a time now where someone like Alex Pereira has developed legitimately really high-level takedown defense. Someone like Alex Pereira is foot sweeping the Combat Sambo national champion Magomed Ankalaev. All right? It's not enough to just be a better pure wrestler. The MMA skill set is way too diverse and everybody is so well-rounded. It's not about just grabbing your opponent, all right? You have to set up your takedowns. And the problem is, in an MMA context, that has literally nothing to do with setups in wrestling. Like, it's so different, right? It's a completely brand new skill set to get deep on takedowns, to beat your opponent to the hips in MMA rather than a wrestling match. And this also sort of comes down to, I would say, wrestling accolades, right? The reason why Bo Nickal is so hyped was because his accolades are absolutely insane. I mean, look, Bo Nickal beat the Russians at the U-23 World Championships. That is wildly impressive because the Russians always whoop our fucking asses when it comes to wrestling, all right? So, you know, of course, right, that is so tremendous that he was able to do that. But the problem is, right, all of those skills fly out the window the second somebody's back hits a fence. All right, now you're not wrestling. Now you're doing fence wrestling. And Bo Nickal does not have more experience fence wrestling than RDR did. I mean, he didn't have any advantage other than just straight up traditional wrestling. He didn't have the size, didn't have the strength, didn't have the overall grappling game of RDR, didn't have the striking. He, again, was at every single physical disadvantage. And it comes down to the fact that he has the wrestling accolades. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, look, Bo Nickal is 29 years old. He is already sort of getting up there in age in terms of hitting his physical prime. The truth is, if he wanted to have the success that he needs to in today's MMA, he should have stopped wrestling after high school. I mean, honestly, wrestling through college, trying to wrestle internationally and go to the Olympics was a huge mistake because, unfortunately, you're just getting diminishing returns at that point. I mean, look, you look at why all of these Russian grapplers are starting to dominate in today's MMA. It's because they come from grappling arts that are just so much more well-rounded than just straight-up wrestling. Like Islam Makhachev, Khabib, Umar, all of these Dagestanis, they come from Sambo, which is essentially wrestling, judo, and jiu-jitsu all in one. And if you're doing combat Sambo, well, that's just MMA with a gi jacket on. They are so much more well-prepared and more well-rounded than somebody who only came from wrestling. Look, I mean, at a certain point in the fight, Bo Nickal hit a really good takedown on RDR, took him down. RDR was trying to throw up submission attempts. Bo did a good job pulling out, staying safe, but then he ends up in this front headlock position, jumps for the guillotine, and I mean, look, man, he just is not as good as RDR is at actually grappling on the ground. All of his years of wrestling didn't matter. He just got outskilled there in that area. And then he ends up on his back because he's given up so much size. It's going to make it that much harder to scramble back up. It's going to make it that much harder to actually accomplish anything off of his back. And then from there, Bo wasn't even looking to hit any more takedowns throughout the fight. He was just electing to clinch with RDR. And you do a second of film study on the guy, and you know that RDR has really, really good knees to the body, especially from the clinch, and Bo is just getting eaten alive there. I mean, Bo keeps trying to step in with his patented overhand, the only punch he's ever developed and learned how to throw. And the problem is, when you're stepping in with an overhand like that, you're just so open to the body, and he was just getting brutalized there. And he kept trying to throw kicks, and it was so bad. It was so bad. Look, I don't talk about this super frequently, but when I was a child, I was what you would consider a youth taekwondo prodigy. Like, I know a thing or two about kicks, and I can tell you, this wasn't fucking it, man. This was bad. This was really, really poor. Like, dude, he's not even turning his hips over here, like, at all. And a part of me does feel kind of bad because this is such a massive step up in competition. The level between RDR and Paul Craig is enormous. RDR, of course, right? Former 2-division champion at 1FC, legitimately an elite grappler, and again, had every single advantage over Bo Nickal other than the pure wrestling. But at the same time, fucking cry me a river, because I'm not the one that came out and said after my very first UFC fight that if I go to the prelims, I'm retiring. I'm not the one that said that I was going to be the guy that's going to beat Hamzat. All right, if you talk a big game, I mean, all right, they're going to throw you to the fucking wolves. And, it was just bad. It was bad. It was bad. Again, it was a complete and utter unmitigated disaster. But the question is now, can we salvage this? Can Bo Nickal come back from this? Theoretically, yes, I think he can. For one, though, he really, really needs to go to the prelims, and he needs to slowly develop his skills. Look, to be fair to the guy, he was very open about the fact that the only reason he went to the UFC when he did was because it was so impossibly hard for him to find fights on the regional scene because of his wrestling background. That's the only reason he went essentially straight to the UFC. But again, right, when you look at somebody like Hamzat Chimaev, who spent, I would say, the first half of his career just shooting double legs, picking guys up, walking around with them, slamming them, dragging Gilbert Burns across the octagon, the reason he was able to do that was because he was massive for the welterweight division. That is just what it comes down to. And Bo Nickal is not currently adequately sized. He looked an entire weight class below RDR in there. So he either needs to drop down to 170 or he needs to adequately bulk up to 185, which will literally translate positively to, I would say, every single aspect of his game. If Bo Nickal was a bit girthier, all of a sudden those knees to the body aren't going to hurt quite as much. But look, regardless, that's a good first step. But if you're going to be stepping in and only looking to land overhands, you're going to be running into knees to the body all day long because Bo's striking game is so rudimentary. It's so poor to watch. I mean, look, I get it, right? He's only had, 8 professional fights, all right? That's not a lot. He needs a lot more experience, but he cannot be getting this experience against former double champs at 1FC. That jump up in competition was just way too massive, all right? He needs to go way back down to the prelims, and he needs to just really dedicate some time with a pure striking coach who can actually develop solid fundamentals. You know what I mean? Allow him to use some sort of a feint game. Allow him to maybe set up his overhands with something. But, I mean, look, man, I would be lying if I said I wasn't very, bearish on Bo Nickal's future career prospects. Because, look, if he was 24 years old, I would tell you, okay, we have plenty of time to grow and develop and become a real mixed martial artist. But for him to be already 29 years old, he's only been training MMA for about 4 years. Man, I don't know. I'm very, very worried for the guy here. I just think that the skill level at the top is so massive. I think, if somehow Bo was, a light heavyweight or a heavyweight, he can get away with a very linear skill set. But, at these lower weight classes, the skill level is so tremendously high. And I think that Bo needs to go to the early prelims. He needs 5 complete tin cans in a row that he can just go out there, run through, and during this time, he can really develop his striking and learn to throw more than just a single fucking overhand. And, then we'll go from there. But as we stand right now, Bo Nickal is a complete unmitigated disaster.